Welcome to Cognitive Curves, where we dive deep into the complexities of the human mind and the psychology behind everyday challenges. In this episode, our team explores the intriguing ideas of Arthur Schopenhauer and his 38 strategies for winning arguments. Through this conversation, we'll break down the psychology behind these strategies and offer insight into how they shape our discussions. And as always, this episode is a collaboration of experts to provide you with a deeper understanding, with the voices you hear representing a unified perspective from our team. Let's get started.
All right, let's dive into something fascinating. We're taking a deep dive into Arthur Schopenhauer's 38 strategies for winning arguments. Have you heard of this?
Oh, absolutely. It's a classic.
So we've got some excerpts from an article breaking down each strategy. We're going to unpack the psychology behind them.
Sounds good.
What do we need to know about Schopenhauer?
Well, he was a 19th century German philosopher, and he really believed that these strategies were all about winning arguments, even if it meant, maybe bending the truth a little bit.
So not necessarily being right.
Right. Not about being right, about winning.
That's kind of devious.
Yeah, a little bit.
I like it. So are we all just unknowingly playing this game our whole lives?
Probably. Yeah. I mean, think about it. We all get into arguments. It doesn't matter if it's a casual debate or a heated disagreement. By understanding these strategies, though, we can kind of see through the smoke and mirrors.
It's like learning the secret code of argumentation.
Exactly.
I'm ready to crack this code. What's the first strategy on the list?
Okay, let's start with the extension.
Ooh, intriguing.
This is where you basically take your opponent's argument and you stretch it, you exaggerate it, you make it seem ridiculous.
So like if someone says, hey, maybe we should limit our screen time, and you're like, oh, so you just want to live in a cave and never use technology again?
Exactly. You're making their argument seem so extreme that yours sounds totally reasonable by comparison. It's like creating a straw man. Easy to knock down.
Okay, so how do you counter that? Do you just call them out on their exaggeration?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one approach. You can directly address it, but you can also try to reframe the conversation, right? Calmly restate your point. Emphasize that nuance that they're missing.
Bring it back to that middle ground.
Exactly.
All right, what's next on Schopenhauer's list of sneaky tricks?
Let's see. How about the homonymy?
The homonymy. Sounds complicated.
It's not that bad, actually. It just means taking advantage of words that have multiple meanings. You intentionally misinterpret a word your opponent uses to kind of twist their words and fit your own argument.
So like using freedom in different ways to manipulate the conversation.
Exactly. Like one person might talk about freedom of speech, while the other one subtly shifts it to mean freedom to spread misinformation.
Oh, that's a classic. Happens all the time in political debates.
All the time. And it works because we often assume we have a shared understanding of words.
It's like a linguistic sleight of hand. How do you counter that?
Demand clarity. When you sense that slippery wordplay, just politely ask for a definition.
Gotcha. Make them define their terms. Okay, this is getting good. What else did Schopenhauer have up his sleeve?
Let's see. This one is unfortunately pretty common even outside of formal debates.
Uh-oh, what is it?
It's called argumentum ad hominem.
Argumentum ad hominem. What's that?
Basically, instead of addressing the actual argument, you attack the person making it.
Oh, the good old personal attack. I see this one all the time online. Instead of engaging with the issue, it's just a bunch of name-calling and insults.
Exactly. Imagine two people are debating climate change. One person says, well, you drive a gas-guzzling car, so your opinion doesn't matter. That's a classic ad hominem attack.
Totally dodging the real issue by going after the person instead of the argument. So how do you counter that?
It's tricky, but the key is to stay calm and redirect the focus back to the issue.
Don't take the bait.
Right. You could say something like, my personal choices are separate from the facts we're discussing.
Let's stick to the topic, shall we?
I like it. Okay, Schopenhauer, what other gems of argumentation did you leave us?
All right, let's dive into one that's super powerful, but also ethically tricky. The use of ridicule.
Ooh, ridicule.
Yeah. It's all about making your opponent's argument look so absurd or foolish that people just dismiss it out of hand.
Humor as a weapon.
Exactly. A well-placed joke or sarcastic comment can totally sway an audience, but it doesn't actually address the argument itself. It's more about winning the crowd.
Yeah, it's not about actually proving your point. It's about making the other person look bad. So how do you respond to that? I think the best way is to calmly point out how inappropriate it is. You can say something like, while I appreciate the attempt at humor, I think this issue deserves a respectful discussion.
Right. Appeal to their sense of reason. Good advice. Okay, what else did Schopenhauer have to say about winning arguments?
Let's move on to one that's super relevant these days.
Laid it on me.
The appeal to popular opinion, also known as the bandwagon effect.
Oh, yeah. Everybody's doing it, so it must be right.
Exactly. Social media has made this one even more powerful. We see it with everything, from fashion trends to political views. It plays on our deep-seated desire to fit in.
So how do you counter this? Do you just have to be that lone wolf standing your ground, even when it feels like everyone's against you?
It's not about being a contrarian just for the sake of it. It's about recognizing that just because a lot of people believe something doesn't make it true.
Popularity does not equal truth.
Right. When someone throws the everyone agrees argument at you, push back. Ask for evidence. Think critically about the argument itself, separate from the hype.
Don't just blindly follow the crowd. Okay, this is fascinating. I feel like we're just scratching the surface here. What other strategies did Schopenhauer have to share?
This one pulls at the heartstrings. It's called appeal to the emotions of the audience.
Ooh, emotions.
Yeah, it's all about using emotionally charged language or imagery to bypass logic.
So basically, manipulation.
It can be, especially when it's used to instill fear, anger, or guilt. Think about those ads with starving children or political campaigns that use fear-mongering.
Powerful stuff. We're emotional creatures. So how do we protect ourselves from being swayed? Do we just have to, turn off our feelings?
It's more about being aware of the tactic. Make a conscious effort to separate the emotional appeal from the facts. Ask yourself, is this argument trying to manipulate me?
Don't let your heart rule your head. Okay, I'm ready for more Schopenhauerian wisdom. What's next?
All right, this one is called the false dilemma.
False dilemma.
It's where you present an argument as if there are only two possible options, when in reality there might be a whole spectrum of possibilities. The classic, you're either with us or against us scenario.
Exactly. It oversimplifies complex issues like you either support this new law or you're against progress.
Yeah.
Totally ignores any nuance or alternative perspectives.
So how do you fight back against this false choice?
Make it clear that it's not that simple. There are more than just two options. You might say, I think there's a middle ground here, and we need to explore other options.
Widen the scope of the discussion. Don't get boxed in. Okay, Schopenhauer, you sly dog. This is getting really good. What else do you have in mind for winning those arguments?
Let's see. Oh, this one is a real doozy. It's called misinterpretation of the opponent's argument.
Misinterpretation, what does that mean?
It means you deliberately twist your opponent's words. Take things out of context, maybe put words in their mouth. You create a distorted version of their argument that's easy to attack.
Oh, I can already feel myself getting frustrated just thinking about this one. It's so annoying when someone twists your words to make you sound like you're saying something you never intended. Right, it's a classic straw man tactic. Imagine someone says, we need to invest more in renewable energy, and the other person goes, so you want to shut down all the power plants and live in the dark ages.
Complete misrepresentation. They're making the other person look foolish on purpose. So how do you combat that kind of deliberate distortion?
You gotta call it out. Say something like, that's not what I said at all, you're twisting my words. Then calmly restate your actual point and make it crystal clear.
Okay, so don't let them get away with putting words in your mouth. Good advice. What other persuasive tricks did Schopenhauer have up his sleeve?
Well, this one highlights the importance of evidence. It's called personal experience over empirical data.
Personal experience over data.
Yeah, it's basically dismissing statistics or scientific evidence in favor of anecdotes or isolated examples.
Oh, I see this all the time. It's like when people dismiss climate change because they had a particularly cold winter, or they don't believe in vaccines because they heard a story about someone who got sick after getting vaccinated.
Exactly. While personal experiences are valid and important, they don't always reflect the bigger picture.
Right. Anecdote is not evidence.
Right.
So how do you counter that? Do you just, throw a bunch of research papers at them?
Well, facts are important, but you also got to acknowledge those personal experiences. You could say something like, I understand your friend had a negative experience, and that must have been hard. However, the scientific evidence shows that. And then present the data.
Okay, so validate their feelings, but then bring in the facts. Good strategy. This is so interesting. It's like we're getting a glimpse into the secret world of persuasion. What else is in store for us?
Well, this next one can be really slippery. It's called the not true fallacy.
The not true fallacy. What's that all about?
It's basically rejecting any counterexamples to your claim by simply saying they're not true examples. It's like moving the goalposts to fit your narrative.
So if I say all dogs are friendly and you point to a dog that bites, I just say, well, that's not a real dog.
Exactly. You're avoiding acknowledging any evidence that contradicts your belief.
That's ridiculous. How do you even argue with someone who uses that tactic?
The key is to pin them down on their definitions, make them define what they mean by real dog or whatever term they're using. Force them to get specific.
Ah, so expose the fallacy by making them clarify their terms. I like it. Okay, what else did Schopenhauer have to say about winning arguments?
Okay, this one can be quite entertaining. It's called distracting with humor or sarcasm.
Ooh, I do love a good sarcastic comment. But using it to win an argument.
Right. It can be a bit sneaky. It's a way to deflect criticism, change the tone, maybe even just get a laugh from the audience. Think of a politician who dodges a tough question with a joke.
They get a laugh, but they haven't actually answered the question.
Exactly. It's a smokescreen. So while humor can be great, you got to be aware of the intent behind it.
Is it genuine or is it a distraction? Good point. Okay, what other persuasive strategies are we going to uncover?
All right, how about this one? Build an argument based on what's popular.
Oh, that's a classic. Everyone loves it, so you should too.
Yeah.
It's the foundation of so much advertising and marketing.
Exactly. It plays on our insecurities and makes us question our own judgment. But just because something is popular doesn't make it right.
Right. So it's all about thinking for yourself and not letting the crowd dictate your choices.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to challenge popular opinion. Form your own conclusions based on evidence.
Okay, good advice. Let's keep exploring these strategies. What's next?
This one is a real conversation killer. Reject your opponent's argument without examination.
Ugh, I hate it when people do that. It's like they're not even willing to listen.
Right. They just shut down any possibility of dialogue. It's a sign of insecurity or intellectual laziness.
So how do you deal with someone who's just not listening?
It's tough, but you can try to gently nudge them towards open-mindedness. Say something like, I understand we disagree, but I'd really appreciate it if you could at least hear me out. And I'm open to hearing your perspective, too.
Right, an invitation for dialogue. Okay, what else did Schopenhauer have for us?
This one is a real blast from the past. Respond to an argument by throwing insults.
Oh, the good old ad hominem attack. It never goes away, does it?
Nope. It's a cheap shot that completely avoids the real argument. Think about how often politicians do this instead of actually debating the issues.
It's so frustrating. It just escalates the conflict. So how do you deal with someone who resorts to name-calling?
Resist the temptation to fight fire with fire. Just calmly redirect the conversation back to the topic.
Be the voice of reason.
Yeah.
I like it. Okay, what else did Schopenhauer have to say about winning arguments?
Okay, this one is a bit of a mind game. Shift the burden of proof onto the opponent.
Shift the burden of proof.
Yeah, you basically demand that they disprove your claim instead of providing evidence for your own.
Oh, like I believe in unicorns, prove they don't exist.
Exactly. It's a way to avoid having to back up your own claims.
So how do you counter that tactic?
Calmly point out that the burden of proof lies with the person making the claim. You could say, I'm open to your belief, but I need to see some evidence.
Put the ball back in their court. Okay, this is turning into a masterclass in argumentation.
Yeah.
What else did you have in mind for winning those arguments, Schopenhauer?
Let's see. This next one involves a bit of trickery. Refute your opponent by recasting their argument as something different. Basically, you distort their argument and then attack that distorted version.
Oh, so like creating a straw man argument. You're making their position seem weaker without actually engaging with their real points.
Exactly. Imagine someone says, I think we should have stricter gun control laws. And their opponent says, so you want to take away everyone's guns and leave us defenseless?
That's such a distortion. It's like they're creating a caricature of the other person's argument. How do you counter that kind of rhetorical manipulation?
Directly call it out. Say something like, that's not what I said at all. You're misrepresenting my argument. Then clearly restate your position.
So set the record straight. Okay, I'm feeling like I'm learning some serious argumentation skills here. What else did Schopenhauer have to say?
All right, this one is all about careful comparisons. Build a false analogy.
A false analogy.
Yeah. It's where you draw a parallel between two things that are actually quite different. For example, running a country is like running a business, so we need to apply the same principles. Sounds good on the surface, but they are actually quite different.
I can see how that would be misleading. It simplifies things too much. So how do you avoid falling for a false analogy?
Carefully examine the comparison. Are the differences significant enough to invalidate the analogy?
Good advice. Think critically about the logic. Don't be swayed by a catchy comparison. Okay, what other strategies did you come up with, Schopenhauer?
All right, this one is all about confidence. Declare victory before the debate ends.
Oh, I've seen this one. It's like dropping the mic and walking off stage.
Exactly. It can be surprisingly effective, especially if you project an air of confidence and certainty.
But it's kind of dishonest, right? It's like saying you won a race before you've crossed the finish line.
You're right. It puts winning above finding the truth.
So how do you counter that?
Calmly point out that the argument isn't over yet. There are still points to be discussed.
Keep the conversation going. Okay, good strategy. What else do you have for a Schopenhauer?
This one can be a real head-scratcher. Use circular reasoning.
Circular reasoning.
Yeah, it's when you use your conclusion as a premise for your argument, creating a loop that doesn't actually prove anything.
Sounds like a logical pretzel.
It is. Imagine someone saying, this book is great because it's so well written. It's like saying the sky is blue because it's the color blue.
Okay, I see how that's going around in circles. How do you break out of that loop?
Look for the underlying assumptions and ask for evidence. What makes you say it's well written? Can you give examples?
Challenge those assumptions. Okay, this is great stuff. What other strategies did Schopenhauer have for winning arguments?
This one plays on our fear of the unknown. Appeal to ignorance.
Appeal to ignorance.
Yeah. It's arguing that something must be true because we don't have evidence to prove it false. Or the other way around.
So like, you can't prove that aliens don't exist, so they must be real.
Exactly. Just because we don't have all the answers doesn't mean we should jump to conclusions.
Right. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So how do you counter this?
You simply point out the fallacy. Remind them that we can't base our beliefs on what we don't know.
Don't let the unknown be used against you. Okay, Schopenhauer, you've given us so much to think about. What else did you have in mind for winning those arguments?
This one can be incredibly frustrating. Attack a point your opponent never made.
Oh, that's just infuriating. It's like arguing with a phantom. You're trying to engage with their actual points, and they keep shifting the focus to things you never even said.
Exactly. It's creating a straw man argument. They attack this made-up version of your argument that's easier to knock down.
So how do you fight back against that kind of shadowboxing?
Calmly point out the misrepresentation. You can say, that's not my position at all. You're arguing against something I never said, and then reiterate your actual argument.
So kill the straw man with clarity. Okay, what else is on Schopenhauer's list?
This next one can feel overwhelming. Persuade by overwhelming with information. It's a data dump, basically. You bombard your opponent with tons of facts and figures, even if they're irrelevant.
Information overload. I've seen this in meetings. Someone thinks they can win by just having more data points, even if they don't really support their argument.
Exactly. They're playing on our cognitive biases. We're impressed by quantity, even if the quality is lacking.
So how do you handle that?
Don't be afraid to ask for clarification. You can say, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed here. Could you summarize the key points that actually support your argument?
Cut through the noise. Okay, what other tricks did Schopenhauer have up his sleeve?
This one is called the tu quoque fallacy.
Tu quoque. That sounds fancy.
It means you too in Latin. It's basically deflecting criticism by pointing out that your opponent is guilty of the same thing.
Oh, right. Like if someone says, you shouldn't smoke, it's bad for you, and you reply, well, you eat junk food, so you can't talk.
Exactly. You're trying to shift the blame instead of taking responsibility for your own actions.
So how do you deal with that?
Acknowledge their point, but redirect the conversation back to the original criticism. You're right, I could eat healthier, but that doesn't change the fact that smoking is harmful.
Don't let them derail the conversation. Okay, this is fascinating stuff. What else did Schopenhauer have in mind for winning arguments?
This next one is, well, it's pretty ethically questionable.
Oh, what is it?
It's called make your opponent angry.
Ooh, deliberately provoking someone.
Yep. The idea is that they'll get so emotional they'll make mistakes and seem irrational.
That just seems like it would lead to a shouting match.
You're right. It's a risky strategy that often backfires.
So how do you resist the urge to lash out when someone's trying to push your buttons?
Disengage. You could say, I'm not going to continue this conversation while you're being disrespectful.
Take the high road. Okay, what else did Schopenhauer have in his bag of tricks?
All right, how about this one? Exaggerate your opponent's position to an absurd extreme.
So basically making a mountain out of a molehill.
Exactly. It makes their argument seem ridiculous and plays on people's fear of extremes.
How do you counter that?
Point out the absurdity of the exaggeration. That's a ridiculous oversimplification, and I never said anything close to that.
Bring it back to reality. This is great. What else is there?
Let's see. This one takes a bit of patience. Remain silent and let the opponent talk themselves into defeat.
Ooh, that's a tough one. You have to have a lot of self-control to not jump in.
You do. It's about letting them keep talking until they contradict themselves or make a mistake.
So their own words become their undoing.
Exactly. But use this one carefully. Silence can sometimes be interpreted as agreement.
Right, it's all about timing.
Hmm.
Okay, I feel like I'm learning so much here. What else did Schopenhauer have to offer?
This one is kind of rude. Interrupt your opponent when they are making a strong point. The goal is to disrupt their flow and weaken their argument.
Ugh, that's so frustrating when people do that. It's like they're hitting the pause button on your thoughts.
Exactly. It's disrespectful and shows a lack of interest in real dialogue.
So how do you deal with someone who keeps interrupting?
Politely address it. I'd appreciate it if you could let me finish my thought. Or calmly restate your point after they interrupt.
Assert yourself. Good advice. This is fascinating. What else did Schopenhauer have to say?
This one is all about subtle manipulation. Agree to premises that seem harmless, then use them to draw a different conclusion. It's like setting a trap.
Ooh, sneaky.
You lull them into a false sense of agreement, then bam! Hit them with a conclusion they never saw coming.
So how do you avoid falling for this trap?
Pay close attention to the premises being agreed upon. Challenge any conclusions that don't logically follow. Don't be afraid to point out inconsistencies.
Okay, so stay vigilant and think critically. Don't let them pull the wool over your eyes with seemingly innocent agreements. What else did Schopenhauer have up his sleeve?
Let's explore one that's pretty sneaky. Let's explore a strategy that can be particularly effective when you're dealing with a hostile audience. It's called use flattery to disarm your opponent.
Oh, flattery will get you everywhere. Is that what Schopenhauer's saying?
Kind of, yeah. The idea is to praise your opponent a little, maybe appeal to their vanity or find some common ground.
Soften them up.
Exactly. By creating a more, friendly atmosphere, they're more likely to be open to what you have to say.
But isn't that a little manipulative? Like, you're not being genuinely complimentary, right?
What?
You're just trying to win the argument.
That's true. It can be a bit tricky. The key is to find that balance between strategy and sincerity. You don't want to come across as fake, but you also don't want to completely ignore their strengths or areas where you agree.
So it's about building rapport, finding common ground, even if you ultimately disagree.
Exactly. It can really help to create a more productive and respectful conversation.
Okay, that makes sense. Especially when you're dealing with someone who's really resistant to your ideas. All right, Schopenhauer, what else you got? What other strategies did you come up with?
Okay, let's see. This one takes a bit of finesse. Feign ignorance to expose your opponent's weaknesses.
Feign ignorance. You mean like play dumb?
Pretty much. You pretend to not understand their argument, force them to explain it in more detail. Sometimes that can reveal flaws in their reasoning.
So you're tricking them into revealing their own weaknesses. That's pretty sneaky.
It can be, yeah. It's kind of a way to subtly guide the conversation, make them do the heavy lifting.
But isn't it a little, well, dishonest?
It does involve a bit of deception,
Hmm.
but sometimes it can be helpful in exposing faulty logic that might otherwise go unchallenged.
Okay, I guess I can see that. It's like you're saying, help me understand your logic, but with a secret agenda.
Right, exactly. You're prompting them to clarify their thinking, which can lead to all sorts of interesting results.
All right, this is getting good. What other strategies did Schopenhauer have in mind?
This one is pretty common, especially in group settings. Appeal to authority to bolster your argument.
Oh yeah, the experts agree with me argument.
Exactly. You cite experts, studies, reputable sources to support your claims. It makes your argument seem more credible.
Because we tend to trust authority figures. But isn't there a danger of just blindly accepting what experts say? I mean, experts can be wrong too.
Absolutely. It's really important to evaluate the sources being cited and to think about potential biases. Don't just take their word for it.
Right, do your own research. Think critically.
Exactly.
Okay, Schopenhauer, you've given us so much to think about. What else do you have in your arsenal of persuasive strategies?
Okay, let's talk about framing. Frame your argument in terms of potential gains and losses.
Framing.
Yeah, basically you emphasize the benefits of agreeing with you and the downsides of disagreeing.
Oh, so you're appealing to people's self-interest.
Exactly. Think about advertising. They do this all the time.
Yeah.
Use this product and you'll be happy and successful. Don't use it and your life will be miserable.
They're playing on our fear of missing out.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a good one. What other persuasive tricks did Schopenhauer have up his sleeve?
All right, let's see. Oh, this one's a classic. Use leading questions to steer the conversation.
Leading questions. So like setting someone up to give the answer you want.
Exactly. You ask questions that are designed to subtly guide them towards your point of view.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine you're trying to convince your friend to go on a trip. Instead of just saying, do you want to go to the beach?
Yeah.
You could say, wouldn't it be amazing to get away from all this stress and just relax on the beach?
Oh, sneaky. You're already planting the idea of a relaxing beach vacation in their mind.
Right.
So how do you counter this?
Just be aware of the tactic. If someone asks you a leading question, don't be afraid to challenge it. Rephrase it in a more neutral way.
Okay, so think critically and don't let them lead you down the garden path. Got it. What other strategies are on the list?
This one is particularly useful for written arguments. Use rhetorical devices to enhance your argument.
Rhetorical devices, like what?
Things like figures of speech, metaphors, similes, those kinds of things. They make your writing more persuasive and engaging.
It's about using the power of language to make your arguments more impactful.
Exactly. Think about famous speeches. They use all sorts of rhetorical devices to grab your attention and create an emotional response.
I can see that. A well-placed metaphor can really make an argument come to life. Okay, so Schopenhauer was a master of rhetoric. What else did he have to teach us about winning arguments?
Let's see. This one can be effective, but it can also backfire if you're not careful. Appeal to pity to gain sympathy.
Oh, the pity play.
Exactly. You highlight your struggles or misfortunes to make your opponent feel sorry for you.
So like playing the victim card.
It can be used that way, yeah. But sometimes it can also be a genuine way to connect with someone on an emotional level.
So how do you tell the difference between a sincere appeal for empathy and a manipulative tactic?
Think about the context and the person's intentions. Are they genuinely seeking understanding, or are they just trying to get something out of you?
Right. Good point. Okay, what else did Schopenhauer have to say?
Let's see. This one's important for anyone who's making a formal argument. Present your case in a clear and logical order.
Keep it organized.
Exactly. Start with your strongest points. Present your evidence in a way that's easy to follow.
Like building a house brick by brick.
Exactly. A well-structured argument is much more persuasive.
Okay, so organization and clarity are key. Got it. What else is on Schopenhauer's list?
This one is about making a connection with your audience. Present your argument in a familiar and relatable way.
Oh, I like this one. It's about using examples and stories that people can connect with.
Exactly. Think about teachers who use real-life examples to explain complex concepts.
Makes it much easier to understand.
Right. And by connecting your argument to things your audience already knows, you make it more persuasive.
So, find common ground, appeal to shared values. Makes sense. What other strategies did Schopenhauer come up with?
All right. This one can be really helpful, especially for written arguments or presentations. Use visual aids to enhance your argument.
Oh, I love a good visual. Charts, graphs, images, things like that.
Exactly. They help to illustrate your points, make your argument more engaging.
A picture is worth 1,000 words.
Right. Visual aids can make complex information much easier to understand and remember.
Okay, this is great stuff. What else is there?
Let's see. This one's a little sneaky. Plant seeds of doubt about your opponent's argument.
Ooh, sounds like we're getting back into manipulative territory.
It can be. The idea is to subtly raise questions or concerns about their argument, even if you don't have hard evidence to refute it.
So you're basically trying to undermine their credibility.
In a way, yes, but it can also be a way to encourage critical thinking and prevent people from blindly accepting everything they hear.
Okay, I guess there's a fine line there. It's one thing to encourage healthy skepticism, but it's another thing to just throw out baseless accusations.
Right, exactly. It's all about finding that balance.
Okay, so Schopenhauer has given us a lot of food for thought here. From subtle manipulation to more ethical approaches, we've really explored the art of persuasion.
And I think it's important to step back and think about the ethical implications of all these tactics.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Some of these strategies are pretty sneaky, even manipulative. We've been given this toolbox full of persuasive weapons, but we have to use them responsibly.
Exactly. It's up to each of us to decide how we want to use this knowledge.
Right. It's not just about winning. It's about using our words ethically and responsibly.
Right.
Schopenhauer's strategies aren't foolproof either, right?
Nope, not at all. They can backfire if you use them too aggressively or if your opponent knows how to counter them.
So it's not just about having a bag of tricks.
It's about understanding how persuasion works and using that knowledge wisely.
Right. And sometimes the most important thing isn't winning. Sometimes it's about listening and finding common ground.
Absolutely. I think that's a much more satisfying outcome than just defeating your opponent.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into Schopenhauer's strategies. I've learned so much about how persuasion works.
Me too. It's been a great discussion.
Now, I'm curious to hear from our listeners.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
What are your thoughts on these strategies? Have you ever used them? Have you ever had them used against you?
Let us know. You can share your thoughts and stories on social media or in our online forum.
And if you're feeling brave, maybe share a time when you successfully used one of Schopenhauer's strategies. Ethically, of course.
Or a time when you saw right through someone else's attempt to use one of these tactics against you.
We're all in this together, folks. Let's use our knowledge of these strategies to create a world where arguments are less about winning and more about understanding.
Well said.
And with that, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question to ponder.
Ooh, a cliffhanger.
Now that you know these strategies, how will you approach arguments differently?
Will you use them? Will you defend against them? And most importantly, how can this knowledge help you be a more discerning thinker?
Those are great questions. We'll pick up this discussion in part 3 of our deep dive.
Let's explore one that's pretty sneaky. Hide your true intentions until the end.
Ooh, sneaky. So, you don't show your hand until the very end.
Exactly. You lead your opponent down a certain path, getting them to agree to things that seem harmless, but you don't reveal your real goal until the very end.
So it's like a rhetorical trap. You lull them into a false sense of security and then, bam, hit them with your real conclusion.
Exactly. It takes a bit of planning, for sure.
So how do you avoid falling for this trap?
Be mindful of where the conversation is going. Question those underlying assumptions. Don't be afraid to ask, what's your point here? Or where are we going with this?
Okay, so stay alert and don't let them play you.
Got it. What other strategies did Schopenhauer have in mind?
All right, this one is really helpful for those one-on-one conversations. It's called adapt your argument to your opponent's personality and beliefs.
So tailor your approach to the person you're talking to.
Exactly. You wouldn't use the same approach to persuade a scientist as you would to persuade an artist.
Right. Different strokes for different folks.
People are persuaded by different things. Logic, emotions, authority. Figure out what works best for the person you're talking to.
So it's about being adaptable, knowing your audience.
Exactly. The more you understand their perspective, the better you can adapt your argument and increase your chances of persuading them.
Okay, that makes sense. It's all about being strategic. All right, we've covered a lot of ground here. Schopenhauer gave us some pretty sneaky tactics, but also some more ethical approaches. What's the biggest takeaway here?
I think the most important thing is to remember that the goal of an argument shouldn't always be about winning. Oh, that's a good point. Sometimes it's better to just listen and try to understand where the other person is coming from.
Exactly. Even if you don't agree with them, you can still learn something from the conversation.
Right. Sometimes the best way to win an argument is to just walk away with a better understanding of the other person's point of view.
I think that's a much more valuable outcome than simply crushing your opponent.
Well said. So, wrapping up our deep dive into Schopenhauer's 38 strategies, we've learned about persuasion, rhetoric, and the ethics of argumentation. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools to navigate those tricky conversations.
Me too. But remember, folks, knowledge is power. Use it wisely. Don't just focus on winning every argument. Try to have productive conversations, even if you disagree.
And remember to be respectful. There's a human being on the other side of that argument. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration of ideas.
That wraps up our deep dive into Schopenhauer's strategies and the psychology of persuasion. We hope this episode gave you a fresh perspective on how arguments can be shaped, both intentionally and unintentionally. Remember, understanding these strategies isn't just about winning debates. It's about engaging thoughtfully and ethically in every conversation. If you enjoyed this episode or found it insightful, consider subscribing to Cognitive Curves and sharing it with someone who might find it valuable. Don't forget to leave a comment with your thoughts or questions. We'd love to hear your take on these strategies. Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and remember, knowledge is power, but wisdom is knowing how to use it.